Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jacqueline Cunell, and on behalf of Baxter Travel Media, I would like to welcome you to the fourth webinar of the Responsible Travel and Tourism Forum. For those who have not participated in the three previous sessions, which were Introduction to Responsible Tourism Practices, Responsible Destinations, and Green Accommodation, you still have time to download the recording from the website. And you can also request any of the presentations that we have done in the PDF format. So today we continue our journey through the supply chain. Last week we covered green accommodation, and today we will be addressing one of the biggest sustainable tourism challenges, transportation. Now, you often hear skeptics say, how can you claim that your industry is responsible or it can ever be responsible when your environmental footprint from transportation, carbon emissions, pollution, noise, and so on, is such a big part of the sector's operation? And this is an absolutely valid point, and one we cannot ignore, let alone dismiss. But the issues regarding transportation and sustainability are very complex, and those who have been in the last couple of sessions have heard me use the word complex a lot. And in a way, that's why we moved away from calling this particular webinar green transport. Instead, we chose to ensure that the session leads to a better understanding of the impacts, looks at the solutions which can range from technology to behavioral changes, from guests, and explore alternatives as well. As usual, so this webinar will be done in two parts. As you know, we have two excellent speakers today, and their bios are on the website. The first part will be delivered by Andrea Dixon, and she's the president and owner of Green Motion Travel, and she will provide an overall introduction to the topic, and she's calling us from the nation's capital. The second part will be done by Teresa Inman. She's Director of Environmental Affairs for Air Canada and a longtime supporter of RTTF. Teresa has been a frequent speaker with us, and she will present the case study, the challenges and the solutions and opportunities for Air Canada and the aviation sector in general. Teresa is calling us from BC today. I will be moderating the session, and we'll compile your questions as you post them, and we'll address them at the end of the webinar. Also, please note that both PowerPoints will be made available to you in PDF format. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Andrea to start us on the webinar today. So go ahead, Andrea.
The impact solutions and alternatives. My name is Andrea Dixon, and I am the owner and president of Green Motion Travel. We are a full-service agency dedicated to helping travelers know more, not pay more. And we do service clients directly, but we really also are building our network of independent travel consultants, and we're training them in sustainable tourism. But I do have a background in sustainable tourism. My master's degree from George Washington University is, my specialization was sustainable tourism. So that's why I started the company. It's a topic near and dear to my heart. And yeah, without further ado, I'll get started because I know we don't have tons of time today. So the goals of this session, what I hope you guys get by the end of it, will be that you understand the impact of tourism and transportation on our Earth and its people, challenges and alternatives to current technologies, some possible solutions for today and the future. I'm not really going to get into sort of the tourism industry as a whole. That's been really, really well covered by Jacqueline and her team in previous sessions. So if you want to know sort of, if you haven't been involved in all the sessions, then I really highly recommend you go back to the archived webinars and listen in there. But just a general overview, tourism is a major economic driver in our world. In 2010, receipts amounted to over $919 billion. So it's just a huge industry. And so we cannot ignore the environmental impact that tourism has on the Earth. And we're going to look into that a little bit more right now. So tourism contribution to climate change, and specifically carbon emissions. It is, there's a study by the UNWTO, which is the World Tourism Organization, that the global climate change contributes tourism contribution to the global climate change is an estimated 5% of all CO2 emissions. That's huge, and it also represents an opportunity for all of us to do better and to bring that down. And the transport sector alone is 23% of all carbon emissions in 2005. Now, within the transport sector, you do have domestic aviation, domestic navigation, and roads. So you've got sort of transportation to and from goods and services. Sorry, the slide moved there. Yeah. So, but then the other sectors that are for carbon emissions would be like energy and manufacturing. So we won't even worry about those. We're just going to focus today on tourism. So really looking and drilling down into tourism, I have a quiz for you to start off with. So just make sure you're paying attention. So if you look at those components, and they're just for tourism, for international tourism arrivals, if you think about it and in your mind for a couple of seconds, order them from least to most or most to least, however you want to do it, in terms of their carbon emission output. So we've got activities, car transportation, accommodation, air transport, and other transport. Now, other up top is our air transport. It contributes 40% of the 5%. I don't know if you can see that at the bottom there. It's 4.9%, rounded up to 5. So 40% of all carbon emissions can be attributed to air transportation. So there's that's a significant part. But really, what I want to draw your attention to is the 75% of the transportation that combined it adds up to. So your air, your car, and your other transport all together are responsible for 75% of the total sector's emissions. And that's really huge. That's more than accommodations and activities combined together. So that is why we're focusing on transportation today, because it represents the most potential to change. And with that volume, there's lots of room to make it to decrease our impact. So moving along, how does tourism use energy? Well, really, as you probably can intuitively guess, transportation to and from a destination and as well within a destination. So that's sort of the big areas. And right now we're going to go and look at it by mode, transportation modes. We have this beautiful graph here. The first one, the biggest one, is air air trips less than 500 kilometers, and it's the biggest slice. And so you can view that, positively and think, well, there's, again, if we can shift behavior and shift the way people plan their trips and do their trips, there's a huge potential to bring down the amount of emissions that that are currently used for air trips less than 500 kilometers. And then the orange-red slice is for trips 500 to 2,000 kilometers, and then the long-haul trips are really in the yellow. And then the green and the blue, the big slice, so it's one that we'll look at, but I'm actually not going to talk about that. That is Teresa's expertise, and so we're going to go right into rail. So here we go. So rail is a low-emission mode of transport. It's very high efficiency compared to other modes, but the great thing is it can be made carbon neutral if you switch to renewable energies, and included in this, you also have your metros and your trams and all of that. But is it the most energy efficient? No, actually coach wins that. Why? Because of the occupancy rates. So because the coach have more people in them, they actually end up being more energy efficient. And this is just more from my personal experience with our company. Coach still sometimes has a perception problem, but I think, again, there's so much potential here for the industry to market itself and to help move the emissions reductions, reduce the emissions down. and now the buses, and it's the development time to make sort of energy efficient buses and to bring on electric buses and all that, it's a lot shorter than, say, like Teresa will talk about with planes and with ships. So there's a lot of really good things are happening in the coach industry, and I don't know if it's always recognized, and I hope that changes, and I hope it changes soon. So the next slide we'll talk about is automobiles. In order, for us in the travel agency side, it would be more the rentals. Now, rental agencies are getting great. They all offer energy efficient rental options. Enterprise, along with Alamo National, they state that they have the world's largest fleet of fuel-efficient vehicles, so it's very easy to find a fuel-efficient vehicle. And they all the time they're coming up with new service product offerings, such as sharing rental cars and hourly rentals and biofuels and hybrids. So there's lots of great stuff out there. You just have to look for it, and you have to offer it to your clients. I think that's half of it is we get into habits, and we don't always change the way we do things. And so a lot of all of this becoming more energy efficient is just changing habits, both really on the consumer part. There's a lot of responsibility on consumer part. Of course, though, personal automobiles is a big part of the tourism, driving to destinations. I am actually guilty of this too. It's citizens in developed countries like Canada are moving towards larger cars and equipped with air conditioning. My last car didn't have air conditioning. My new car does. And so there's lots of technology gains to reduce emissions. And as we see, new technology could reduce all tourism emissions by 7%. But, you know, it's sort of counterbalanced by this trend towards bigger vehicles. So you can only do so much when consumer habits don't change. So we've got to figure out how we can get other reductions. So one way is you stay longer at a destination and you drive shorter distances, or you just eliminate the trip. So there are ways around it. They're not always easy, and they're not always fun, really. Well, it just, yeah, you have to think of it in a different way when you're planning your trip. So cruises. Now, this is we were just talking beforehand, it's an understudied area, but of course in the industry it's just massive. In general, and we're talking about the mass tourism, the big guys, the cruise lines are fairly similar with respect to their overall commitment. They're trying, and they're working hard, and it's on their radar, and they're really committed. But changes don't happen overnight. These are big ships. The build time is huge. So in general, if you're looking for more energy efficient options, you're going to go with the newer ships. It's like the cars too. The new cars are more energy efficient. So right now, the Allure of the Seas is probably the most efficient because it's new. If you do want to check a specific ship's efficiency, you can go to that website at the bottom there, fishingefficiency.org, and they'll tell you. It's a handy little tool for sure. And the other thing the cruise lines are doing is they realize it's not just environmental, it's cultural they have to work on for the ports they visit. So they're really working hard to contribute to conservation and education and visitor management and scheduling. I was mentioning, it used to be that sometimes cruise ships would pull in and they had to get their guests to their activities, and they had to get them there, within a couple of hours, and they had to do it now. So they would commandeer all the transportation, and they would sometimes take the school buses so the local kids couldn't go to school, which, not great. And that's changed, and that's good, and that's the way it should be doing. So so everything is, there's lots of potential, and it's all on the company's radar to change things. So here's some initiatives, more physical ones, not so much cultural, but they are aware. They're really reducing their water and energy conservation. They're controlling their emissions. They're looking at recycling. They're looking at recycling when they go into the ports. Everything is being studied, and it's just changing, and everyone's becoming more responsible all around, which is great. And then, well, of course, the best option is self-propelling vehicles, or walking, whatever you want to call it. And it does occur mostly at a destination. Not many of us walk to our vacations. I know there was a guy in Montreal that just walked around the world, but the vast majority of people are not, it's not practical or doable. So, but destination managers need to be major players in this area and work with people like myself, travel agents, and so we can present the options to our clients. They're out there. You have to dig, and it would be great if there would be if they were more available. But examples include free bike programs or renting bikes. The Alpine Pearls is an interesting one. It's a great concept, but it takes a lot of organization. But 27 municipalities in 6 alpine countries got together, and they wanted to promote soft mobility tourism. So once the guest gets to a destination, one of the destinations within the Pearls, they have easy access to public transportation on site and environmentally friendly programs and activities, and so they can have this wonderful vacation and have a very low impact. So that would be great if we could see more of that and to offer to our clients. That would be just fantastic. So what does the future hold for the tourism industry? Business as usual predicts large growth in carbon emissions, which will speed up the effect of climate change. So carbon emissions are expected to grow by a huge percentage by 2035. So we got to figure out how to not have this happen. And the biggest growth area is air transportation. We have all the tools. We all have to have hope. We can change this. It doesn't have to be this way, but it's not just one supplier or one industry. It's everyone. It's the consumers. It's tough. It's kind of like dieting for me. It requires a shift in thinking by the destinations and consumers and suppliers, as I said, but it can be done. But otherwise, as you see here, I changed the graph. Here we are in 2025, and we've already passed that. But we don't want to get to this, to the 2035. The orange there is just huge, and we have all the tools we need. We can do this. So we just have to work together and keep it on everybody's radar. So yeah, how do we face this challenge? Best way, of course, eliminate. Just if you can eliminate, then that's the best way to do it. Just anything you can get rid of, get rid of. You can't eliminate, mitigate. We can't eliminate everything. Travel's been around since time began probably, and it's always going to be there. So we just got to figure out how we can do it better. We will have to adapt, though. Conditions are changing due to climate change. They're already starting. There's a great report by the WTO that talks about climate change and tourism, and it will show you that seasons in Canada probably extend, so the shoulder seasons will be more open, but that means maybe the winters will be as long. So all destinations and businesses in the industry are going to have to figure out how they can adapt to all this changing. And new technology, but just don't replace it with bigger cars. But the new technology we've always got to keep on our radar. Mitigation process is a big area as well. So again, the whole process, if you're going to want to mitigate your trip, is to eliminate, get rid of it to start with. So avoid the activities if you can. And then, if you can't do that, once you've done that, reduce the emission of carbon CO2, by focusing on the energy efficiency practices. So, pick a more fuel-efficient rental car, pick a more fuel-efficient plane, all that type of stuff. And these facts are available. You maybe have to look around for them, but they are there for sure. And then you also substitute practices. So, stay at a hotel in the city center so you can take the public transportation instead of driving, or walk instead of taking public transportation. You have to think substitution as well. So reduce and substitute. It's a mindset. And if you've done all that stuff, you're really down, you're down to your bare basics of your core requirements are for your trip, then you can look at offsetting. And we'll go into offsetting right now a little bit to talk about that whole field. Here's just quickly some more mitigation tactics that can be done by you if you are I'm talking more from the travel agency side too, but shift the transportation from car and aircraft to rail and coach. Increase the length of stay, take less weight, rent or use smaller vehicles. I have a whole host of them, a massive list. If anybody wants more, feel free to contact me. I'd be happy to talk to you about that. But let's get into a little bit about what are carbon emissions. Well, there's always a formula, isn't there? Of course, there's a formula. The International Energy Agency and the International Transport Forum, they have identified sort of 4 components that go into emissions. I'm not going to go into that. That's sort of beyond my expertise, but really it looks at the fuel choice, the activity, intensity, and all that type of stuff. So you put all these, all the choices that we make as consumers, and it goes into that mix, and then a number pops out so that tells us what the carbon emissions are. So then what are carbon offsets? The carbon offsets are credits for energy reductions that are made at another location, such as a wind farm, that create renewable energy and reduce the need for conventional sources of energy. So really the idea behind them is that greenhouse gases, they spread very quickly around the planet, and it doesn't matter whether a ton of CO2 is emitted or reduced in Canada or elsewhere in the world because it spreads so quickly. So, but if you can't reduce in one location, then you can pay for reductions to be made at another location. That's sort of what it is. And we want to reduce this or offset these because climate change is caused by buildup by carbon dioxide and other gases, and it traps the heat, as you probably know, and raises the temperature. So that's sort of the whole background there. Now, I'm only going to look at flight offsets. There's other ones, but here's just a sample in case you aren't familiar. So what you do first is you calculate the carbon emissions of a journey. So say Toronto to Heathrow, one way would be 1.3 basically tons of CO2. So you've got that fact, and then you say, okay, then you to make the flight carbon neutral, you need to buy or produce somehow the equivalent amount of CO2 is bought using a renewable energy, so forestry or solar or wind or something like that. Costs range from $10 to $20 per journey, and the money goes to finance the projects. What I really, really want to stress here, though, offsets do not eliminate carbon emissions. They do not eliminate them. It's a way to balance, and they're voluntary. These are choices. There's no, no one's being forced to do this. So it's all voluntary, and it's sort of a last resort. Really look at your mitigating process first, your substitution, and of course elimination would be better choices. But once you're down to the bare bones and you can't do any more, then offsets can be considered. So are they all the same? Nope, of course not. It's a new industry, which means it's a little bit not Wild West, but that type thing. David Suzuki has a Purchasing Carbon Offsets book, and I think he says in 2008, $139 billion was transaction in the global carbon market, and that was double that from 2007. So it's growing, which means that you really got to be careful what carbon offset program you look for. Really, in a nutshell, if you think gold standard, you'll be fine, because that is the top of the line, really, and it was developed by the World Wildlife Fund, and that's the one we use actually at our company, the gold standards. And so if you remember that, it'll be good, because they have to go through, they have criteria and they go through audits and stuff. So that's why you would want to have the third-party auditors to make sure that the standards are upheld. It's quite important. So, and a final note, I think I'm still doing okay for time here. Emissions and jobs. As Jacqueline kind of alluded to at the beginning, there's sometimes controversy. People are like, oh, it's such a, you shouldn't travel far and you produce more. But it is complex. The thing is that the least developed countries, a lot of these companies, the vast majority of their money, it comes from tourism. So it's really important to do tourism right. And he said, Francesco Fangali, I'm sorry, I'm probably saying it wrong, but he was the Secretary General of UNWTO back in 2007, and he said this: to those who say, do not travel far from home and avoid taking planes to save several tons of carbon emissions, they should think twice, because these long-haul trips are often to countries that are home to the planet's poorest populations, which will and already are the first victims of climate change. These communities would be doubly affected if we deprive them of the economic contribution of tourism. So myself, I do believe that, but I do believe tourism needs to be done responsible. And it's not just the suppliers, it's the consumers, it's all of us, it's the destinations, it's all of us working together to make sure that everyone benefits the social side and the cultural side and the economic side. And I think that's pretty much it for me. If you have any questions, even after, I'm definitely happy to take your calls. And there's my contact information. And I think I'm going to hand it over to Teresa now.
Well, I'll pick it up from here. Thank
Okay,
you.
sorry, Jacqueline.
No, that's fine. Thank you, Andrea. That was definitely a very comprehensive presentation, and it provides us with a good introduction, really, on the multimodal transport issues. In the future, we intend to do webinars which will address each one of those transportation modes in much more detail. I should add that one of the areas which warrants a deeper look will be the cruise sector, particularly because it faces interesting challenges, and Andrea did mention some of them, but it is both transportation, accommodation, and it provides activities. So it is a growing sector, and they have issues around jurisdiction like aviation does, and another major environmental problems to do with the seas and logistics of goods and so on. So we will look at doing something specific for the cruise sector and the other ones as well. I would like now to introduce Teresa, who will give us a case study for Canada, and we're running quite well on time actually, so we can get started right away. So here's Teresa.
Thank you, Jackie. And I just want to say a quick thanks to the people at Baxter Publications for your ongoing commitment in hosting the Responsible Travel and Tourism Forum. Once again, Air Canada is very proud to be a part of it, and we really believe that it's a very positive forum for educating people. So with that, just to say it's my pleasure to be here with you today on the phone and share with you this journey that aviation is on towards environmental sustainability. Just to calibrate your thinking a little bit, we often hear such big numbers when we talk about aviation. So for example, in economic and social terms, we know the industry employs 33 million people in aviation and related tourism jobs. Last year, 2.4 billion passengers were carried by the world's airlines, and something in the neighborhood of $3.5 trillion worth of business is supported by the industry. So you have these millions, billions, trillions. There's this litany of big numbers out there. But what we want to talk about and focus on today is how aviation is looking at managing its numbers around the environment. So globally, greenhouse gas emissions from man-made sources last year was 30 billion tons of CO2, and 2% of that is attributed to aviation. So what's the story? Well, here is what I think is a positive news. Aviation recognizes that these numbers around environment need to be smaller, and with that recognition comes a responsibility to act on reducing its environmental impact. Aviation has taken up this challenge and has set a path forward in a way that, quite frankly, no other industry sector in the world has done. And today I'd like to walk you through how the industry has set out this path towards environmental sustainability. And to help illustrate this, I'm going to use some specific Air Canada examples to show how this path forward translates to us on an individual carrier level. As an outline, I'll just start out by first telling you a little bit about Air Canada corporately, and then talk about the environmental challenges and aviation's plan to meet those challenges, and how we activate that plan to mitigate these impacts. And then we'll end with some concluding thoughts on that. So about Air Canada, some of you may already know who we are, but just in case, we're Canada's largest full-service airline and the 15th largest carrier in the world, with annual revenues of over $10 billion. We're the largest provider of scheduled passenger services in the Canadian market, the Canada-U.S. transborder market, and in the international market to and from Canada. We serve over 32 million customers annually and provide direct service to 170 destinations on 5 continents. We employ 26,000 people, and are a founding member of Star Alliance, which is the most comprehensive air transportation network on Earth. We'll be celebrating next year in 2012 our 75-year anniversary, and we look forward to continuing to proudly serve Canadians here and around the world. Okay, so let's skip to the chase. Aviation's #1 environmental priority is reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Again, globally, we talked about this 30 billion tons of CO2, with aviation being responsible for 2% of that. And what is of concern, and I think what Andrea mentioned earlier, is that the demand for air travel continues to grow, such that by 2050, we would be accounting for 5% of global emissions unless action is taken, and that's the key part. So what is the sector's plan? Well, we're going to give you some insight into that, but I want to start off by showing you this little short video clip that highlights airlines' response to climate change. For those of you who maybe don't have sound, it's okay. It's just music. There's no talking in it. It's just visual and a little bit of text. So here we go. Okay, so aside from some pretty cool airplanes in action you saw in the video, there was also a mix of some targets and some aspirations. So let me add some clarity to that. Back in 2008, the aviation industry became the only sector at the global level to develop a set of specific targets for reducing our emissions. These targets listed here on the slide look to, first off, steadily improve fuel efficiency by 1.5% per year going out to 2020. Secondly, to cap the growth of net aviation CO2 from 2020 onwards, even though we expect our passenger numbers will continue to rise. So that means stabilizing emissions, not letting them go any higher. And thirdly, by the year 2050, we will reduce by 50% the amount of CO2 released from aviation compared to 2005 levels. These are very ambitious targets, and they are not without a number of challenges. Even the first one alone, that fuel efficiency improvement of 1.5%, that actually translates into an investment of $1.5 trillion towards new aircraft that are more fuel efficient. So there's some very ambitious targets and investment associated with these. But these targets have been collectively agreed upon and endorsed by airlines and aviation stakeholders. And this is around the world in a global sense. Okay, so the next question becomes, nice targets. How are you going to reach those targets? Well, there's a plan to do that. And the plan to reach these targets relies on a common global sector approach that utilizes this four-pillar strategy. And these are the four pillars here: improved technology, effective operations, efficient infrastructure, and number four, positive economic instruments. So I'm going to walk you through these four pillars and provide a few specific Air Canada examples for you to help emphasize what they mean. Okay, so pillar one. Of the four pillars, the best prospects for achieving emission reductions comes from technology. New aircraft designs, engine advancements, and new composite materials have all allowed significant fuel efficiency improvements. At Air Canada, with the introduction of the Boeing 777 into the fleet in 2009, it demonstrated a 15% reduction in CO2 per seat mile. And in 2004, we're scheduled to begin delivery of the Boeing 787, which has a further, it's a 20%, not a further, but a 20% reduction in CO2 per seat mile, which is we're pretty happy about. You can see the effect of the improved technology most visibly by looking at this Air Canada diagram. Now, from the earliest aircraft back in sort of the 1970s until now, you can see how it's taken less fuel to move 1 ton of traffic. This decline in the slope represents about a 70% fuel efficiency improvement, and the majority of that comes from newer and better equipped aircraft. Another key technology development under Pillar 1, which is relatively recent and really quite exciting, is the development of sustainable alternative fuels. Why? Well, because biofuels allow us to grow while at the same time reduce our overall emissions. Sustainable alternative fuels for aviation can reduce CO2 emissions substantially. IATA's estimated close to an 80% reduction on a full carbon life cycle basis. So you can see there's a lot of excitement around this as how aviation can get to these targets. At Air Canada specifically, we've entered into a number of agreements with various suppliers of alternative fuels that again demonstrate that lower carbon life cycle overall. This isn't without, however, a number of significant challenges related to the economics, the commercial scalability of developing these fuels in the appropriate quantities, and ensuring consistent sustainability criteria is applied. So in other words, you don't really want to solve one environmental problem by creating another environmental problem. So, for example, a lot of effort right now is focused on sustainable second generation or new generation biomass sources such as algae to serve as a feedstock. So it's not competing with food or, large water use, taking away from other parts of the ecosystem. And right now there's about over 300 various initiatives going on around the world related to aviation alternative fuels. So there's a lot of work being done in this area right now. And aviation is being very careful to try to do this right in a way that, like I say, doesn't cause another environmental problem along the way. Well, moving to pillar 2, the more efficient aircraft operations can be, the more fuel and CO2 emission reductions can be achieved. By improving your operational practices, in other words, how you fly the plane, so this relates to flight procedures for landing and takeoff, weight reduction and engine washing maintenance procedures. These are just some of the measures that can reduce emissions. At Air Canada, we've had a fuel efficiency program in place since 2006, led by our very own Captain Claude Saint-Martin. And the impact of that program, we've seen a CO2 reduction of 250,000 tons. Moving to pillar 3. This is around infrastructure and air navigation improvements. This represents a significant opportunity for CO2 reduction in aviation. Back in 1990, the IPCC estimated about a 12% worldwide inefficiency in the air transport infrastructure system. So since that time, we've seen about a 4% improvement, but 12 minus 4, it still leaves a lot of room to go. So these air traffic control system improvements being worked on, for example, right now in Europe under the single skies, and in the U.S., it's called the Next Gen. It's the navigation systems there. These will go a long way where, in particular, we see congested airports and crowded airspace. At Air Canada, we ran this summer this ENGAGE trial, which was an optimized flight plan between Toronto and Frankfurt. What it did is it took into account the routings, altitudes, speeds, and the aircraft performance capabilities, and resulted in a 2,200 kilogram CO2 savings for the one flight alone. So really, there's things that we know how to do. What we need to do is make sure that the system and the aircraft capabilities and what we understand are optimized so that we're burning less fuel and producing less CO2. Pillar number 4. So just to reiterate, those first 3 pillars we talked about, they move CO2 reductions quite significantly. But it's likely that they won't quite close this gap towards carbon neutral growth that we talked about in 2020 as one of the targets. So at this stage, what may be likely is positive economic measurements may need to be implemented to achieve those targets. Industry is very much in support of maintaining its global sector approach in a way that allows any economic measures to be fair, equitable, and provide a way to reinvest back into environmental measures. And just as an aside, what we see in some cases is certain areas want to start their own cap and trade mechanism, for example, and what it does is it ends up funneling money out of aviation into a certain government that perhaps doesn't necessarily allocate that fund towards environmental protection. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done to make this work globally for all of aviation. So those were the 4 key pillars as an industry sector, as well as some of the examples at Air Canada. However, there's a couple of other programs we operate on the carbon reduction front, and I'll just talk about them a little quickly here to give you a little insight into them. This slide here relates to our ground operations, where a number of our ground vehicles have already converted to electric and propane fuel sources to achieve less CO2 emissions and also improve local air quality. And on a leading edge, Air Canada has been actively engaged over the last 5 years in a number of innovative fuel sources, such as hybrid technology and hydrogen fuel cell trials to support this development for future ground operations. And as an offering to our customers and employees, Air Canada partners with Zero Footprint to provide a voluntary carbon offset tool for anyone who would like to make their flight carbon neutral. The projects that Zero Footprint has for this are all based in Canada, BC, Quebec, and Ontario, and customers have the options as to which one they might like to support. And again, this program is voluntary. It's a voluntary offering only. It's not technically part of our plan to reduce CO2. I focused most of the presentation so far on the priority of reducing our carbon emissions, being that was our number one environmental issue. But there's a couple more environmental priorities I'm going to quickly touch upon. And the first one here is around waste management. At Air Canada, we operate an onboard recycling program for North American flights, and we're currently working through our National Airline Association to figure out the best way to recycle off of international flights. The challenge is around ensuring we can recycle while still complying with international waste laws in Canada and in other countries, so there's definitely some challenges there. Over onto the ground, our groomers collect and recycle in-flight magazines and soap containers, and within our facilities, there's recycling set up for items such as paper, cardboard, wood, glass, metal, plastic, and cooking oil. And finally, touching on this issue of aircraft noise, which is an industry-wide issue. It's a very big issue in very populated cities, particularly in Europe. And what you can see in this diagram, what you're looking at is what's called a noise footprint. And the first one there with the Boeing 707, you see that whole outline is a 90 decibel level, and you can see how far out, and that's where you hear a 90 decibel sound level. And as you move down to the bottom where the Boeing 777 and the Boeing 787, that's the footprint of where the 90 decibel sound level is. So you can see there's a pretty significant lowering of noise from aircraft. And a lot of this really has to do with what happened in Pillar 1 where we talk about new technology. There's just better, quieter aircraft out there now. And in addition to this, noise abatement procedures are in effect at most airports to further provide noise minimization. So finally, we can see there are many environmental challenges that exist for aviation. We covered today aviation's recognition and response to its environmental priorities, focusing mostly on the ambitious targets and the four-pillar strategy, all as a global sector approach to reducing greenhouse gases. Intertwined within aviation's journey is the engagement and partnering of many stakeholders, governments, aircraft engine manufacturers, airlines, etc. And it all plays a role in ensuring that air transport continues to evolve and develop so it continues to become an environmentally sustainable mode of transportation. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you very much, Teresa. It sure is very encouraging to hear of the many initiatives being undertaken, by the individual companies, the associations, governments, and so on, as you outlined in your last slide. And especially, being guided by the four-pillar strategy. And as you know, there is no silver bullet, and it's not going to happen overnight. And what we're looking at is a multi-pronged, multi-stakeholder approach to reducing the environmental impact of the transportation sector. And what this calls for is really an unprecedented level of cooperation on the public-private sector, scientists and NGOs. And so thank you again, and I'd also like to thank Air Canada on behalf of Back to Travel Media for your ongoing support of RTTF, which we started 5 years ago, and you've been there ever since. And this is very important to us, and we'll look forward to continuous collaboration with Air Canada. Now we have, which is really good timing, ladies. You've done an amazing job in terms of your presentations. We have approximately 10 minutes, and we do have a few questions, and I'm just going to look up 1 second. There's question from Karen, and I assume that's to possibly Air Canada or both of you. And then we have another question from Shannon and to Andrea. Andrea mentioned a perception challenge with coach travel. Can she elaborate? So To give Teresa a little bit of a break, although this question has just come to Andrea, would you be
For sure.
able to address that?
Yeah, no problems. No, thanks for asking for clarification. That's great. No, this is just more what I found with our clients. You know, if they've traveled coach in the past, if they're sort of more senior, they perceive it as not as luxurious. Maybe they have to get up early. They're always moving around a lot. It doesn't have the cachet, I guess, of other modes of transportation, and sometimes they prefer to fly to destinations. But it really, as we know, those of us in the travel agent industry, it's really changed. Schedules, are very long. It allows for more individualization within the tours. Sometimes people think, oh, I'm just going to be herded around like a cattle, and it's not like that. The tours have changed. The industry is listening. So it's sort of overcoming that perception and saying that, look, coach tours are amazing. There's so many. You can do very individual components within a coach tour. Some of them you don't have to leave very early. So it's a great way to get around. And on top of that, it's incredibly environmentally friendly. So, but with some of our clients, it's an education process, letting them know how the product has changed, the product offering has changed over the years. That's pretty much it. Oh, I see there's another one there, which I haven't had a chance to read yet.
So yes, we have one from Kelly, but we know what we'll do, Andrea, is have Teresa just answer a couple of questions and give you a little bit of time to formulate an answer to Kelly's question. And so the question we have from, give me one second here, from Karen O'Connor. How much CO2 produced through the industrial production of 1.5 trillion is, I assume, means how much of that is aircraft emissions? I assume that's, excuse me, that's the question. So is that clear, Teresa? Or
I think so. I understand it to mean that in the production of new aircraft, how much CO2 is produced through that. So the answer that I have is I don't know what that number is exactly. What I do know is that Bombardier here in Canada, the Boeing company, and the Airbus company, all of them have very significant environmental efficiency programs throughout their production lines and schedules. So they themselves implement and monitor and measure their carbon footprint throughout their production lines. So we could kind of calculate that out and see what their carbon footprint is on an annual basis as they're producing aircraft. I don't have a number off the top of my head I can give you, though.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I know Karen, so we can talk about that.
Excellent. Yeah, I think one of the question could be reframed onto what is the emissions, the production life cycle, including emissions, right?
Right.
So essentially, when we have labels on certain items, whether we could be clothes or it could be cars or whatever, we are able now to footprint from the production into its full life cycle, so cradle to grave. And I think that's the way that a lot of, especially large manufacturers, are trying to ensure that they assess and the emissions and they embed them into the total life cycle of the product. Of course, there are many variables around the usage of the product and so on, but it's something that for sure is now being questioned in terms of the supply chain and the emissions life cycle of each one of the items that we use as part of our the value chain of our operations, right?
So maybe when our the 787s start rolling off the line on Boeing, we'll have a little sticker slapped on the side with the this is the amount of CO2 that was created as a result of producing this product. It's similar to what we're seeing in Europe now on certain products like you just alluded to.
Right. So the chips, right? In the UK, the first item that came out was that you bought a bag of chips, and it would say it was zero point 0.3 grams of CO2 to produce.
Right.
That may be the future. Complicated, but it is moving closer and closer to be able to assess that. We can just basically measure anything right now. The factors are there. The other thing is that, as we had talked briefly before we started, Teresa, was the question with regards to air traffic control and some of the different regimes in North America and in Europe that may increase efficiencies. I don't know if you can talk a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, okay. Well, so there's the number of navigation systems around the globe is pretty high. I don't want to quote a number. I read it just the other day, and I don't want to get it wrong. But really, what it means is that if you think of as the crow flies from point A to B, in air navigation systems, the way some of them are set up is that the plane doesn't fly as the crow flies directly from A to B. There's these kind of highways in the sky, and sometimes you have to go to the corner before you can turn. And that's done to, it was set up that way to fly around certain airspaces, or in the case where we have lots of congestion, a lot of airplanes in the air at the same time, planes are rerouted in a way that makes them fly much longer. So this efficiency, that improvement we're talking about with these navigation systems is around, well, if you can optimize that so as much as possible, fly the aircraft so that it goes from point A to point B as directly as possible, what you do is you take out all that extra flying. I mean, you think about one airplane, but really right now there's something, I think on an average basis there's like half a billion, or something like 500 million people in the air on any given day. It's huge. It's a huge number of airplanes in the air. So when you start adding that up, aircraft by aircraft by aircraft, all those little inefficiencies of having to drive further around to get from point A to B creates more fuel burn and more CO2 emissions. So a lot of work is being looked at right now, and particularly right now in Europe and in the U.S., on improving their systems so that you get more direct flying and you get less congestion, so you're not having planes circling over airports. So just to try and explain a little bit about where that gap is, or where that inefficiency is in the current systems, and the more that the world, globally, we improve those systems, there is, again, an estimated about 12% inefficiency in that system right now. We want to take that 12% inefficiency out so that we're not, burning fuel that doesn't really need to be burned.
Yeah.
Does that help, Jackie? Is that?
Yes, I think so. Yes, for sure. And it just speaks to what we were talking earlier about the integrated approach, that it's needed across all sectors.
Exactly.
We have a question for Andrea, which you might have, and then we have one.
Chance to look at quickly. Yeah.
And then the last one is Nicholas, I think, and we're maybe running a couple minutes over. I hope it's okay with our speakers.
Yeah, no, for sure. I'll try and be fairly fast anyway. No, that's a great question, Kelly. And as an agent, when I'm talking to a client, I ask questions, really. I can't, what can I eliminate? Well, it depends on the client, and so you always have to listen, ask questions and listen. It's really important. What is the purpose of the trip? What are their hopes? What do they want to get out? And then from there, you can sort of offer them options. We never force, of course, anyone to do anything. We just present options and say, well, Nick, we had one client going to Europe, and they wanted to do several little hops in Europe, and was every one of those necessary? We could show how much carbon emissions were produced on each trip, and one of them can be eliminated. Join up 2 meetings instead, type thing. So they could do a conference call there. So that helps. But it really, it's hard to say exactly what you can do. You have to look at a specific example, what the client is hoping to accomplish, and what their baseline necessities and what is integral to their trip and what is non-negotiable. And then you can look at the stuff that you can substitute or eliminate or change up, and you just present options. And there's always options to present. Once you start thinking in this mode, you'll have lots of you'll get used to coming up with suggestions that might work for them. Can they go to a destination like, say, the Alpine Pearls, where they can use more soft mobility, or can they stay in the center more so they have more mobility? Yeah, so it really depends on the client. It's so individual. But that's why we have travel agents, right? So we can learn and listen and come up with solutions for them.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Thank
That's
you.
it for me.
Yes, and then the last question we have is for Teresa from Nicholas. Can you see it, Teresa?
Okay.
Air Canada question.
All right.
Yeah.
So the question is, I guess no one else can see that, right? So I'll just read the question out. Many of my colleagues who are elite or super elite are still surprised that Air Canada has yet to stop using so much less recyclable plastic and styrofoam in the economy cabin. Any reason why Air Canada has yet to change to compostable plastics? We consider the optics of this issue to
be high value.
nothing else after that, but okay, so I think it's with reference to the visibility of the issue. This is a really good question. You know that saying, when a butterfly moves its wings in China, it creates a storm somewhere on the other side of the world? Well, in a similar way, when we talk about something like, what do we use on our aircraft for cups? So some of the factors that go into that decision are the weight, okay? When we use plastic, it's lighter than using China. You talk about our elites and super elites, so some of our business class travelers, for example, you know, like to see sort of more substantial cutlery and products on their tray, but from a weight perspective, that weighs more. So when we consider what we use on the aircraft, weight becomes part of a factor. The other part that becomes a factor is the ability to recycle certain plastics. It's very challenging in many locations, and on top of that, what is also challenging is that a lot of aircraft waste, and this sort of lends to the recycling program, and what's very difficult about it is, not only is plastics recycling not available at many locations, a lot of the waste that comes particularly off our international flights, it's considered international waste by the Food Inspection Agency. And what that means is it needs to be incinerated, or it needs to be taken care of it needs to be treated special, almost like a hazardous waste. So you're not allowed to go in and pick things out of it, so to speak. So it creates a challenge on that front as well. And I mentioned earlier, we talked about a recycling program, and one of the things we've been working on in the last year and a half in particular is, what about the things on the international flights, for example, like pop cans and newspapers, which we think are less likely to be contaminated with food or organic materials? How can we recycle those off of international flights? And we are jumping through a whole bunch of hoops to make sure we can do it and manage any risk that the Food Inspection Agency sees around that. So in all, to answer your question, sometimes there's things restricting the use of certain products, particularly on board the aircraft, that have to do with not just where you're physically flying to and from, but the capability of, once you land, your ability to, take that recyclable and find a place to recycle it. And secondly, also, whether you can actually take it out of the waste stream to begin with. So it's very challenging. There's no magic bullet on this one. We've looked at a lot of different options to use different things, and you know, we continue to sort of look to see how we can make that system the most environmentally friendly that we can, but it's really difficult.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you, Teresa, for that. And I think because of the level of visibility that the nature of your business has, with 20, what is it? How many million people you move a year?
32.
That's right. These issues are really up front, but there are a lot of challenges behind that that you mentioned with regards to jurisdiction and health and so on. So it's very important that
I think what's challenging too is just I can say is, you know, I come home and I want to recycle something. It's easy, you know, and so I go, well, if I'm a passenger on an airplane, why isn't this just as easy? And I think this is part of the challenge, and we've heard this from our customers. We you know, answer all you know, requests for information we get on this from customers and employees and surveys and things that we do, which is recycling seems so simple and mainstream when we're at home. Why should it be so difficult all of a sudden when you get onto an aircraft? And you start adding up all these factors of what you can and cannot take off an airplane, what adds weight to an aircraft, your facilities available, restricted airspace or land space and restricted zones where the aircraft are. You can't just send trucks in and out at airport property. It's all secured. So there's a whole number of levels that get added on that makes something that, you know, seemingly so simple, just we're going to recycle it, to something much more complex when you start adding up all these factors.
for sure. And that's not even counting issues around pandemics.
Which is their job to make sure no foreign vectors get into Canada.
Mm-hmm.
And so for ships, like the big cruise ships that come to Canada, come in and out of Canada, and likewise for aircraft, there are specific rules set out that we have to comply with because every single day we're flying in and out of this country, bringing people and all sorts of things with them into the country, and their job is to make sure that from sort of an agricultural and food perspective, not even talking about the health perspective,
Mm-hmm.
to make sure that those entities and vectors stay out of Canada. It's not an easy job. So we're trying to work with them to say, look, where is really the risk here and how can we mitigate that risk so we can create a process instead of dumping all this stuff into incinerators or specified sanitary landfills,
Mm-hmm.
and recycle it. And you know, we're a year and a half into this, and we still have a lot of work to go to get there. But that's part of the process, and it's not just Air Canada. Here in Canada, it's us, WestJet, Air Transat, and Air Canada Jazz. The four of us are working together to try and create a process where we can do this.
Mm-hmm. No, that's excellent. Yeah, and you do have one of the comments is that, and I will read it. Why we do this webinar is just to demonstrate that we have a long way to go, but we're definitely moving in the right direction. I would like to thank now Andrea and Teresa for two outstanding presentations, and obviously all our participants who have taken the time to log in and hear what these two excellent presenters had to say. We'd also like to say we have two more left of the series for 2010. We have 2011 actually. The November 30 Adventure Travel and the December 7 Volunteerism. So please register now. You can check the website for updated information on our speakers, and please tell your friends, colleagues, competitors, whoever may be interested. We also have the Leadership Awards, and they're still open for nominations. We have extended it to December the 15th. And we have four awards: an overall award, an outstanding individual leadership award, a student leadership award, and a travel agent or travel agency award. So you can nominate someone, and then they can. You can self-nominate or the third-party nomination as well. We look forward to your participation in the next couple of weeks. And as usual, we'd like to thank our webinar sponsors and our webinar series sponsors. We have Ryerson University, Air Canada, again, thank you, Delta, Chelsea, eContact, and of course, Baxter Travel Media, which makes RTTF possible. So thank you again, and see you all in a couple of weeks. Have a good day. Bye-bye.